What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G. and Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network, on Peacock, and on Vice. As today we're talking episode 4, the series finale of the Who Killed WCW series. The part 4 of the 4-part mini-series, docu-series, whatever you want to call it, on the Who Killed WCW stuff. Overall, and I'll get to the overall stuff a little bit later on, it was a good show. It was very well produced. And I can sit here telling you now, after having watched all the parts and now having reviewed them, I learned very little new information. I'm someone that's not even the biggest wrestling historian, and I read the book that Guy Evans did, who was interviewed for the show, and Brian Alvarez and whatnot. Brian Alvarez was not on the show, but he did help write the book, and it kind of just regurgitates a lot of that same information. Now, you do hear it from some new people, including the wrestlers themselves, and Bischoff, and Turner executives. I guess that was kind of the only new thing that they featured was the Turner executives compared to past documentaries that WWE has done. I mean, I thought that was interesting. And also, like, what went through with the sale with, like, Jamie Kellner, who actually passed away in real life. I say real life because this is real life. He actually just passed away in real time, like a week or two ago, actually, during the airing of this show, which was interesting. He was not interviewed for this show, but he did pass away about a week or so ago, so rest in peace. But they talk about him a lot on this episode. They talk about a lot of different people that kind of contributed to the demise of WCW. And they also ask everyone who partook in the show, well, who actually did kill WCW, which they kind of went around the horn asking people that a couple of weeks ago when they first started the show. But we'll get into that at the end. So they open up this episode, and it's called the Final Nitro, by the way, is the name of the episode. And they open it up with a message saying that this episode features footage never before seen that was taken on the last day of WCW, with that Nitro in Panama Beach or wherever it was in Florida in late March 2001. So we hear from a lot of the wrestlers, and they mention how a lot of them just saw the writing was on the wall for the company, that the end was coming on the Sooner side. Probably not when it did. But the Time Warner AOL merger happened in 2000. No one really knew it would fall apart. Now, that part I did not know, and that might just be me being ignorant or not having known that. Because it is interesting, like, you think back on it, like, AOL, like, you know, a lot of people have AOL email accounts back in the day. I did, do, whatever. And you would think, oh, you know, that's a pretty big deal. But it really wasn't, though, because I guess they bought it, or they merged with AOL thinking that it would be bigger than it was with the whole, you know, rise of the internet. And AOL didn't really take off like that. I mean, obviously, AIM was also a thing, and that was huge. But only for a decent part of the 2000s, and that was really about it. Now everyone's kind of gone to Yahoo, which is still a thing, and AOL's still a thing, but not as big as Yahoo and Gmail and stuff like that. So I thought that kind of part of this episode discussion was interesting, talking about how no one really foresaw the AOL stuff bombing as much as it did. But even Nitro itself, the television show, reached a new low creatively. They were just doing awful shit, which I'll circle back to at the end as far as why WCW died. They mentioned the uncensored 99 buy rate was drastically up from the 2000 one. So the 2000 one was drastically down, rather, from the 1999 one. The 1999 one, which was, I think they had similar main events of Hogan versus Flair. Yes, which they were still doing in 99 and 2000, which is embarrassing. It went from like a 500,000 buy rate, which is wild, to like 60,000 in 2000, which is an 80% drop-off, which is fucking crazy. And Bischoff mentions what he's already talked about before with like the debt that Time Warner was, or Turner was kind of racking up, was allocated to WCW so they could write it off as a loss. Bischoff said early on, around 99, 2000, whenever he was brought back, that he wanted to sell WCW while it still had value. And the powers that be were like, no, we're not doing that. So the merger was finalized. It happened in 2000, but it was finalized almost exactly a year later in January of 2001. By that point, AOL stock had dropped 50%. And Turner himself, Ted Turner, had no voice or vote in his own company. That was also an issue because he was an advocate for WCW. And the other people that were in charge at this point when the merger went through did. They did have a voice, and they did not want pro wrestling on their network. Brad Siegel, again, brings up selling the company. I mean, it was Bischoff first, but I guess Brad Siegel then kind of circled back and was like, yeah, maybe we'll take you up on that offer to attempt to sell the company. They find two potential investors, whose names they give off here. I didn't write them down, but they were kind of in, wrestling, not wrestling fans, but they wanted to see WCW continue under the premise that it would eventually be number one again, which that was never going to happen. But they did this whole idea of WCW having time off, the hiatus, and it being brought back with the Big Bang pay-per-view in May of 2001, which I knew about, and that was an interesting concept for WCW to go into the black for a little while and then be rebooted a couple months later. TNA's done that a lot over the years when they've switched networks and stuff. They just won't air content for like a couple months. WCW was going to do something similar and be brought back, kind of start anew with new storylines in May of 2001. Around that point, I think they mention here, I don't know how accurate this is, that the company was worth $67 million. Jimmy Kellner takes over. He was kind of the head of the WB Network, among other departments and whatnot. He hated wrestling, apparently. So the show went from being on hiatus to just being straight up canceled, because at that point, he just did not want to devote 2 hours of, primetime television to WCW. I think we're talking Nitro here. Maybe Thunder as well was still a thing. I don't know if Thunder was still around by early 01. Maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But he just did not want wrestling on their network. So Bischoff, when he thought the deal was done for them to sign with these kind of sports media investors or whatever, he was like, all right, cool, it's done. They're like, no, Eric, it's not like, not that the deal is done. The deal is off. We're not doing it. We're dropping out. So the deal was dropped because without television, the company had zero value. So it was around that point that WWF indicated they had interest. There was a guy, something Snyder, not the Snyder Cut, but something Snyder, they had previously worked, had at least known about WCW and some of the higher-ups there, Jimmy Kellner, Brad Siegel, whatever. They had kind of spoke a little bit. They had already known each other, so they had that rapport, and that kind of played a pretty big role in Snyder wanting to kind of go through with the purchase of WCW, knowing that it could be valuable for them as far as, getting a new asset and using their stuff for like future DVD releases and shit like that. DVD wasn't really a thing in 2001. It was all about VHS and whatever. At that point still, DVD didn't come around until when, 02, 03? I don't know. I think it was around in 01, but it wasn't really as big as it would end up becoming in the years that followed. But they just wanted the tape library. So they had a conversation. The WWF deal goes through ultimately on Friday, March 23rd, 2001. And they swooped right in and took it. And McMahon, they show him starting Nitro that Monday, the final Nitro ever. And wrestlers did not know this was coming. They went to Nitro like it was business as usual, nothing was wrong. And they announced the WCW thing that was being bought by WWF a few days earlier. Nitro was that Monday. So they probably knew something was up. But did they just not read the news, or were they not online? I don't know. But as far as WWF buying them out. But yeah, they went there like it was business as usual, and a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people, not just the wrestlers, because a lot of those people were picked up. A lot of like the behind-the-scenes people and people like that were not picked up, and they were just without a job after that. So Booker T tried to look at it from a positive standpoint. He saw it as an audition. He competed on that last Nitro, won the World Championship. He saw that as a good sign that, hey, they're going to probably use me. If we're going to acquire WCW and bring some of these people in and do something with them, I will probably be used because I am the world champion. So he thought it was like an exciting thing, but no one else really saw it that way. Nash called it sad. He compared it to the Titanic, which is very accurate. I thought that was funny, just the way that he kind of worded it. DDP does not have a lot of nice things to say about Jamie Kellner. He blamed Jamie Kellner. He said, fuck you, Jamie Kellner. He was the one that killed WCW. It was his fault. That's DDP's perspective. So they ended up selling WCW for just over, or WCW ended up being sold rather, for just over $4 million. That's it. For a company that was valued at $67 without television, they were only worth around $4 million, which is really wild when you think about all the money that WWE has made off of, like, they've probably made, maybe not $4 million, but off of like one WCW release alone with like the documentaries and the DVDs and stuff. They have superseded that by a lot. Especially with the NWO designs and the t-shirts and all that other shit. I mean, they've made a lot of money off of WCW over the years. So Bob Ryder actually blamed Brad Siegel. Bob Ryder, a name you might know from his time in TNA. He passed away a few years ago, but he wrote like an online blog blaming Brad Siegel for killing the deal. And he was like the conspiracy theorist, and people saw this and thought it was interesting. They brought that up. So Siegel and Snyder deny having any like working together as far as like conspiring. So to make sure that the WWF deal went through, because what Ryder was claiming was that the deal fell through with Warner and the show being canceled because WWE indicated they already had interest. So that was why the television deal was canceled, because WWE wanted to buy it outright, and they were already conspiring to buy it. It was like the conspiracy theory back then. Siegel's asked about it, says no. Snyder's asked him about it, he says no. Siegel thinks that he didn't think WCW could turn things around, and he still regrets it because he was, a big advocate for WCW and whatnot. But he's right, though. I mean, creatively especially, that company was just in such a shitty state. This was just the final nail, but that was a ship that was already sinking. I mean, that ship was going to sink regardless, and, I mean, that whole thing was just inevitable. I think that's kind of my big takeaway. So Siegel's not necessarily wrong. This just kind of accelerated the process. It just kind of sped up the inevitable. And Snyder even says that they needed a strong advocate, which they did not have in Turner. Jamie Kellner was not that guy. Turner had no vote himself, apparently. And they had no advocates. That was also a reason why it died. And he thought that WCW could exist separately within the WWE universe, which they didn't really go into on this episode, which was disappointing. I don't know that they didn't have enough time or what. But, there was the idea of at one point of doing WCW as, the Raw show, and then WWF being the SmackDown show. The two brand split, the brand split that we'd end up getting would be what they were considering. And they did not end up doing that. It failed after the Booker T. Buff Bagwell match on Raw. They've talked about that before. They talked about that with the Buff Bagwell Dark Side, I think, is when they kind of got into it, because that was when Bagwell was brought in for that one match. He was fired a couple days later. It just didn't work out. So it never actually ended up existing separately. Rock, who we hear from only for the fifth time in this entire show, and I'm not talking the episode, I'm talking the entire series. We hear from him for a fourth or fifth time, otherwise we have not really heard from him at all. He was the WWF guy, and he has some interesting insight, but it doesn't really value anything at all. It doesn't really say much of value whatsoever. But he remembers writing down when they bought WCW, he remembers writing down who he wanted to work with and coming up with ideas for what these matches and feuds would look like and bringing it to Vince. And he never really did that sort of thing. But he did it with WCW because it excited him, so he could work with the NWO and Sting, and that never ended up happening, and Goldberg, which did end up happening in 2003, and the NWO it ended up happening as well in 2002. So he actually got to work with a fair amount of the WCW guys, Booker T as well in 2001. So probably more than anyone, Rock got to make a lot of those matches happen, which is cool, before he kind of went part-time starting in 2002, 2003. Goldberg said that he sat out the rest of his contract. A lot of people did. They were getting paid guaranteed money, so why go to work right away? Booker T took the buyout and went right to work for WWF. You had the option of taking the buyout and working for WWF, or just sitting home getting paid for the next, 2 years or whatever, however long the contracts were. And he knew that if he was off, and that that would not bode well for him to be gone and then to come back. He wanted to capitalize on whatever momentum he had, so he went right to work for WWF. But the invasion angle failed, massive, colossal failure, because of the lack of star power and also the creative suck. They were always made to look inferior to the WWF's crew, and they had Stephanie involved, heading ECW, which was stupid. So they just kind of gloss over the invasion thing. They mentioned briefly in why it failed, but they don't really go into great detail about it. That alone is like a Dark Side of the Ring documentary. Not because it's dark, but just because the angle was terrible. Nash also says that the NWO was not going to work again, and he knew it. He knew the writing was on the wall, that if they were to go to WWF, the NWO was not going to be as successful as it was before, and he was going to watch his friend, Kevin was going to watch his friend Scott Hall, kind of wither away back into alcoholism, which he did. And I guess he had been sober for 11 months. He had been sober for almost a year, and then he went back to WWF, and he immediately started drinking again. And that's just, it was terrible. It was very sad to hear him say that. I did not know that, so I thought that was interesting. WWF buried WCW. That was the general premise of the invasion angle. Bischoff recalls being brought in 2002 as the general manager and how shocking that was. He recalls being fired as the on-screen authority figure, in real life departing WWE in 2005 because he had kind of played out the role of GM. So he had been there for 3 years and it was time to move on. For WWF, anyway. So they talk about, what killed WCW when everyone's asked one final time. People say the booking committees and Time Warner executives and the top stars. And then one person, it might have been Siegel, actually, the WCW killed itself, which honestly is very true. It wasn't just, it was a combination of really everything I just said. But it really was WCW at some point was going to die eventually. It wasn't like it was that they were at their peak when WCW was killed off by Turner executives in the mid-90s. I mean, it was on its deathbed anyway. With some of the shit they were doing, Bret Hart did not hesitate to say Bischoff and Russo. I mean, Bret Hart doesn't give a fuck. Kevin Nash doesn't care either, so hearing their insight was interesting. And then they ended on a nice note, too. Kevin Nash gave Bischoff a lot of credit for making WCW his success, his baby, in the 90s. And they show Bischoff watching that clip from Nash, and he gets really emotional talking about it. And he says that he's grateful for the life that wrestling gave him. So I thought they ended on a nice note. Again, that was it. You don't really learn a lot from this episode, or really the entire show. Some of the more emotional stuff was, I mean, the show's worth watching, I think, for the production value. And it's short, too. It's only 4 episodes. It's a docuseries. It's not like it's 10 episodes. That would just be egregious. There's probably more they could even go into detail about. And they did feature some information that was not in that WWF documentary, the WWE documentary, the Monday Night Wars thing from was it 2014, 2015? They did that show for a while around that point. And again, it had already been beaten into the ground around then. But, this was featuring some more exclusive interviews, and it wasn't told from the perspective of WWE, which was nice, because it wasn't produced by WWE. Rock did produce it, and he does work for WWE now. But it wasn't WWE's documentary, which I appreciated. So they weren't really talked about as much as WCW itself was, which was the whole point, which I appreciate. It was well produced. I would think it's honestly perfect for someone who is not a wrestling fan or has not watched wrestling in 20 years. If you're an active fan now, and have probably seen all the stuff I'm talking about, the documentaries, Dark Side of the Ring, read the book or know about the book or whatever, this show is not really for you. You will learn nothing. I saw someone say that this show was a massive disappointment. I'm not really sure what was expected, because I wasn't really expecting anything new. I just thought it was a cool concept, because I know, again, we've heard about it a million times before, and it wasn't going to be anything groundbreaking. I don't know what people were really expecting from this. If you think it was lame, then that's fine, but if you were expecting something massive, again, I don't really know what you were expecting. But it was enjoyable. I mean, I think the production value, people bearing each other, kind of squirming to figure out, who killed the company, when it was really like the person talking about it in that exact moment, was funny. It is worth watching for that reason alone. And again, I think to me anyway, the target audience is, because the dark sides, at least you learn a lot of new information with some of them. This one, I would say the target audience is more people that do not currently watch wrestling, have never watched wrestling, or have not watched wrestling since WCW died over 20 years ago. I actually went to SmackDown with someone on Friday who was a big wrestling fan in the Attitude Era and fell out of it after the Monday Night Wars died. And I recommended the show to him. He actually just watched the ECW biography, which I got to go back and catch up on those at some point. And he really liked that, and I said, hey, go watch this Who Killed WCW show. I think you'd really like it. So for people like that, I feel like they'd enjoy it. If you already know a lot of this stuff, you probably won't enjoy it, or fact check it and think it's bullshit, whatever. But it was entertaining, like I said, to see everyone burying each other. That was kind of funny at several points. So thank you guys for checking out this review and all the reviews of Who Killed WCW right here on the channel in the last month. The playlist is down below if you missed any of the other episode reviews of Who Killed WCW here on the channel, so check those out. We have a lot of Dark Side of the Ring reviews. I've watched and reviewed every one of those episodes in the last couple of years, so you could go back and check out that playlist as well. That show wrapped up earlier this year, I think. I think it started in March, right? I mean, that feels like it was last year, but it was actually earlier this year. We did that whole review as well for Season 5 or Season 6, whatever season it was, here on the channel a couple months ago. You can check out those reviews. And just thanks for checking out the channel in general. I appreciate it. So have an awesome one, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.